I am Fletcher. If you ran into me in the high school hallway back then, you probably wouldn't remember much. I was average height with neatly cut brown hair, carrying an old backpack, grades not outstanding but good enough for teachers to nod approvingly. I was the kind of student who drifted through the crowd without making a ripple. I used to think my life would stay that ordinary, until I started asking questions no one taught me how to answer. I grew up in a small Midwestern town in America, where everything was straightforward. Boys liked girls, families had dinner on time, Sundays at church. There, people didn't talk much about differences. They just looked and stayed silent. The first time I realized something was off in me was at 15. Not because I liked boys right away, but because I couldn't stop looking at another boy. His name was Ethan. Ethan sat 2 rows in front of me in English class. Broad shoulders, straight back, laughed a lot. The kind of guy who, when he entered a room, seemed to redirect the light. He wasn't a movie heartthrob, he just made people feel safe. At first, I just noticed how Ethan twirled his pen between his fingers when thinking. Then I realized I remembered his laugh after school. Later, I looked forward to Mondays just because we had class together. I didn't dare name that feeling. I told myself it was just admiration, just friendship, just because I had so few friends. But my body didn't know how to lie. Every time Ethan turned back to borrow a pen, my heart beat a little faster. Every time his shoulder accidentally brushed mine in the crowded hallway, my spine tingled with heat. Those sensations came so naturally, so clearly, it scared me. I started asking myself, am I normal? At that age, I didn't have the word gay. Or if I did, it only existed as a cruel taunt someone threw out on the playground. I just knew that if others found out what I was thinking, I'd lose everything. Friends, safety, maybe even myself. So I learned to hide. I laughed when the guys talked about girls. I nodded when they debated who was the hottest in the grade. I even pretended to like a girl in class just to avoid more questions. But every afternoon, when I got home, I'd sprawl on my bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting to Ethan's eyes. I hated myself for it. Hated it so much that many nights I prayed for it to go away. Ethan didn't do anything wrong. He treated me normally. Friendly, approachable, sometimes kinder than necessary. We talked about homework, old rock music, dreams of leaving this town after graduation. It was that kindness that hurt me the most. Once, after school, Ethan invited me to stay at the library for group work. It was dark when we finished. The parking lot was empty, wind cold, yellow lights casting our shadows on the pavement. Ethan laughed, cracking some silly jokes. I stood there, listening, my heart tightening at a simple thought. I want this moment to last a little longer, just a little. But then he mentioned a girl on the cheer squad. His voice casual, not noticing I'd frozen. In that moment, I understood something very early. Some feelings are born to be hidden. That night, I got home later than usual. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring into my own eyes. I tried saying it out loud, very softly, as if afraid the walls could hear. I'm into guys. The words dropped to the floor like a foreign object. I didn't feel relieved, just scared. I was afraid of tomorrow, of others' stares, of not being able to go back to how things were. So I swallowed those words. I decided to pretend they never existed. My school years continued, calm on the outside, full of unanswered questions inside. I still saw Ethan every day, still smiled, still talked, and still loved him in silence, like a secret I locked myself in with. I didn't know that was just the beginning. I started realizing that staying silent was a way to exhaust myself. In the days that followed, I lived as if standing on 2 different foundations. One was daytime Fletcher, going to school on time, no one suspecting a thing. The other was nighttime Fletcher, lying in a dark room, headphones on, listening to songs much sadder than a 15-year-old should, and thinking about Ethan until it felt suffocating. I started noticing everything about him in too much detail. The way Ethan rolled up his hoodie sleeves when hot. The way he bit his lower lip when concentrating. The way he unconsciously leaned toward me when talking, as if there were no distance. Those little details meaningless to others, But to me, they were like touches without touching, enough to soften my heart, then hurt it. One lunch, we sat at the cafeteria table. Friends noisy around us, trays clattering, familiar smell of pizza and fries. Ethan sat across from me, chin in hand, smiling at me. "Fletch, you ever think about leaving this town?" he asked. I paused for a second. I thought about it a lot, about running away from here, from myself. "Yeah," I said, "probably somewhere farther. College. A big city." Ethan nodded, eyes lighting up. "Me too. I don't want to stay here forever." In that moment, I imagined a different version of the future. A different place. Different people. There, I wouldn't have to hide my feelings every time I looked at him. There, I could name my love without shame. But then Ethan burst out laughing, turning to talk to someone else. That fleeting future vanished like a daydream. I hated myself for thinking that way. The teasing started appearing more toward the end of the school year. Not aimed at me directly, just casual remarks, giggles when someone acted weird. I learned to shrink, make myself smaller in the crowd. Once, in the locker room after gym, I accidentally saw Ethan take off his shirt. Just a few seconds. His back firm, skin tanned. I turned away immediately, heart pounding, face flushing. I stood there, pretending to rummage in my backpack, mind blank. I'd seen something I wasn't allowed to, and I hated how strongly my body reacted, like it was betraying me. That night, I showered for a long time. Hot water ran down my shoulders, my back, but couldn't wash away the thoughts. I leaned my forehead against the wall, eyes closed, trying not to think of Ethan. But the image kept returning, frighteningly clear. I started understanding that desire doesn't ask for reason's permission. I didn't dare search for answers online. I was afraid of browser history, afraid of being discovered, afraid to face a truth I wasn't ready for. So I chose the safest way, denial. I told myself it would pass, that it was just a phase, that I just needed to try a little harder. But every school day, every time I saw Ethan, that lie thinned a bit. One afternoon, snow fell early. School let out late due to a partial power outage. Ethan and I sheltered under the awning, waiting for rides. Not many people around. The space unusually quiet. Ethan pulled up his hood, shivering from the cold. I stood very close enough to smell his familiar soap. "Freezing," he said, turning to me. I nodded, my hands in my coat pockets, clenched tight. If I just reached out, just touched his hand, everything would change. I knew that, but I did nothing. The ride came. The moment passed. Ethan waved goodbye like always. I stood there, watching, and realized I just missed something very important, though I didn't know what to call it yet. That night, I asked myself the familiar question again. Am I normal? And like always, I had no answer. In the following days, I started avoiding looking at Ethan too long. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid if I looked one more second, something in me would break. We still talked, still laughed, still did homework together, but I kept just enough distance to protect myself. I sat a bit off in class. I left the cafeteria early. I learned to end conversations before they got intimate. Ethan seemed to notice the change. "What's up with you lately?" he asked one afternoon, as we packed books into lockers. "You seem more distant." I froze. So many answers raced through my head. But in the end, I chose the easiest. "Probably just school," I said, not looking straight at him. Ethan was silent for a few seconds. I felt his eyes on my face, like he was trying to read something I'd hidden well. "Yeah," he said finally. "If you need help, just say." The words were light enough to blow away like wind. But for me, they lingered long. I nodded, closed my locker, and walked away. I didn't dare turn back. I was afraid if I did, I wouldn't be able to leave again. I started journaling, a thin notebook hidden under my pillow. I didn't write about Ethan directly. I wrote about the feelings, about the fear, about how each day I felt like I was living a life not fully my own. Some lines I wrote and tore out. Some sentences I didn't dare finish. But at least there I didn't have to pretend. Winter dragged on slowly. Snow melted and fell again. School held the spring dance, an event everyone looked forward to. Not me. I knew I'd have to watch couples hold hands, laugh, while I stood on the sidelines, belonging nowhere. Ethan went with a girl. She was pretty, blonde, bright smile. They looked right together in the way adults would nod approvingly. I watched them from afar, feeling a strange emptiness in my chest. Not sharp pain. I didn't stay long. I left before the band played the first slow song. I drove home, opened my room door, and sat on the floor, back against the bed. I didn't cry. I just sat there, breathing slowly, as if breathing harder would spill my emotions. That night I dreamed of Ethan. Nothing special happened, just us sitting close, silent. When I woke, the regret was so clear I had to lie still for a while to let it fade. The teasing at school started targeting another boy, small, quiet. I heard the words I feared most said casually. I wasn't the target, but each time I shrank, as if they touched me. Once, Ethan was next to me when it happened. I didn't know what he thought. I just held my breath. Ethan said nothing. But as we left, he whispered, "Those guys are awful." Just that. But it made me both relieved and hurt. Relieved Ethan wasn't like them. Hurt because I wished I could tell him why it mattered so much to me. At the end of the school year, we had a short field trip. Ethan and I were roomed together. A coincidence that made me both panicked and excited. That night we lay on twin beds, lights off. Moonlight slipped through the curtains, drawing faint lines on the walls. Ethan turned toward me. "You asleep?" he asked. "No," I replied, voice lower than usual. We talked about small things, college, dreams, fears of leaving the familiar. Ethan's voice in the dark sounded different, deeper. In a very short moment, when we both fell silent, I thought I'd say it. Just one sentence. But then I remembered all I could lose. "I'm tired," I said, turning away. Ethan said nothing more. I heard his breathing even out, then sleep. I lay there, awake, tears flowing slowly, silently. The next morning, everything was back to normal. The school year ended. We took photos, signed each other's shirts, promised to stay in touch. Ethan gave me a quick hug, like friends. I hugged back. And in that moment, I knew for sure I loved him, truly. But I also knew I'd carry that love with me out of school years. Like a first love never named. Like my life's first unanswered question. The summer after junior high came quietly, as if it didn't want to bother anyone. My small town was the same. The main street with the old diner, gas station on the corner, and afternoons so long you could hear cicadas buzzing in your head. Ethan and I still texted. Not much. Enough to not lose touch, but not enough to pull us closer. His messages were short, carefree, just like him. Mine were always written and deleted a few times before sending, like I was censoring my own emotions. We met a few times, at the public library, convenience store, sometimes just by chance on the sidewalk. Each time, my heart beat faster, but also wearier. I started understanding that loving in silence wasn't safe loving. It was loving alone. One evening, Ethan invited me to an outdoor movie in the park. Temporary screen, people with blankets, food, laughing lively. We sat side by side on the grass, shoulders touching. Cool night, light breeze. In the dark, I felt his presence vividly, warm, familiar. I wished I could lean my head on his shoulder like the couples around us. But I didn't dare. I never had. As the movie neared the end, Ethan turned to me, whispering, "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah." He looked at me longer than usual, like considering something. I held my breath. Then Ethan smiled, turning back to the screen. The moment passed gently, letting me know that if I said nothing, nothing would change. At summer's end, I got my acceptance letter. A university in another city, not too far, but enough to leave here. I held the letter, feeling both relieved and afraid. Leaving meant starting over, but also meant leaving Ethan. I met him before departure day. We sat in the car, parked in the empty lot behind the ball field, where kids went when they didn't want to be seen. Dusk, sunset gilding the windshield. "So you're leaving soon," Ethan said. "Yeah," I replied. I wanted to see you first. Ethan nodded. The air in the car was quiet enough to hear my heartbeat. I clenched my fists, palms sweaty. I'd rehearsed so many sentences in my head all summer. But when the moment came, they vanished. Fletch, Ethan spoke, voice softening. You got something to tell me? The question opened a door I'd locked for so long. I turned to look at him. Ethan's eyes weren't joking, not carefree, just sincere waiting. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I took a deep breath. I just want to say, you're really important to me. Ethan smiled. You too. I knew, but not in the way I needed. I nodded, swallowing the rest. I didn't have the courage to name my feelings. I chose safety again. We hugged goodbye. This time, longer. I felt Ethan's heartbeat through his thin shirt. In that moment I thought, if I don't let go, will he let me go? But I let go. The night before leaving town, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my bed, looking around the room where I'd grown up. Old posters, scratched desk, window to the familiar street. I realized what I was leaving wasn't just the place, but a version of myself too afraid to live truly. I wrote one last line in my journal. Maybe normal isn't the most important thing. The next morning, I got in the car and left town. As the town sign faded in the rear view, I didn't look back. I knew I'd carry Ethan in my heart, like a first love unnamed, like my first life's question no one answered. But deep inside, a tiny thought formed. Maybe somewhere else I'll find answers for myself. The first city I set foot in was unlike anywhere I'd known. Noisy, rushed, indifferent. But that indifference made it easier to breathe. No one cared who I was, where from, or what secrets I carried. I was just a new student, a name in a long list. The first weeks of college blew by like a strong wind. I learned to fend for myself, to walk in crowds without bowing my head, to live without checking for familiar faces nearby. At night, I'd lie on the dorm bed, hearing footsteps and laughter from the hall, thinking, maybe I'm safer now. But safety didn't mean the end of longing. Some nights, I missed Ethan so much I'd sit up and open the window for cold wind to rush in, as if the chill could numb the rising emotions. I missed how he called me Fletch, missed his jacket smell after gym, missed the moments we almost touched but stopped. I wondered if Ethan thought of me. The question followed me to lectures, to the library, even in fitful dreams. But then I realized the more important question was, what will I do with my feelings from now on? One afternoon, I entered the student center and saw a small poster, crooked on the bulletin board, LGBTQ plus support group, Wednesdays, room 214. I stood there long enough for someone passing to glance curiously. I left, then returned, then left again. Finally, I stepped into room 214 on a drizzly Wednesday evening. Small room, soft yellow light. About 10 people, some chatting, some silent, some looking just like me, startlingly so. When it was my turn to introduce, my throat was dry. I'm Fletcher, I said. I'm not sure what I am. A few smiled. No one laughed. No one pried. The silence was non-judgmental and permissive. That night, I returned to my room feeling a bit lighter. Not because I had answers, but because for the first time I'd allowed myself to say it aloud. I started writing more, not just in my journal but in unsent emails to Ethan. I wrote about snowy afternoons, the spring dance, the field trip shared room. I wrote about the last hug in the empty lot. Each email ended with the same unsent sentence. I loved you. One night, as I sat before my laptop screen, my phone buzzed. Message from Ethan. How's college? I stared at the text long. My heart raced like I was 15 again. I typed, deleted, typed again. Finally, good, different, but I'm learning to adjust. Ethan replied, glad for you. Just that. But this time, no pain. I felt at peace. Maybe because I knew our story didn't end with a missed confession. It ended with me starting to step out of my cage. At the end of the first semester, I went home for a visit. The small town was the same. Old roads, old diner, empty lot behind the ball field. I drove past without stopping. I smiled. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I no longer needed to return for answers. That night, I lay on my old bed, staring at the familiar ceiling. The 15-year-old's question returned, but this time it didn't scare me. Am I normal? I didn't answer. I didn't need to anymore. I understood some questions aren't meant for immediate answers. They just lead us farther, deeper, more honest with ourselves. Somewhere in that city, there might be someone to love me in a way I'd never dared dream. Or maybe not. But for the first time, I knew I wouldn't turn my back on my own desires anymore. My school years closed there. Not with a confession, but with a quiet decision. I won't live my life in silence. The second semester passed faster than I thought. I got used to entering spaces where my story wasn't strange. I still hadn't labeled myself, but I no longer shrank when hearing someone talk about love between two guys. I learned that sometimes just allowing yourself to exist is progress. But no matter how far I went, school years clung like a shadow. They appeared in the smallest details. Sneakers echoing on gym floors, damp with smell of old libraries, or yellow lights in parking lots at dusk. And at the center of all those memories, Ethan still stood, clear and unfading. I didn't text him often anymore. Gaps between messages lengthened, naturally like a branching path. But some nights, when everything was quiet, I'd open my phone, scroll old conversations. Not to cling, but to confirm it all happened. One evening, in the support group, someone spoke of a first love never named. His story differed in setting, in ending, but the feeling was painfully similar. When the meeting ended, I sat alone in the empty room, realizing my eyes stung. I understood one thing. My pain wasn't from Ethan not loving me. It was from never allowing myself to love fully. That night, I decided to do what I'd avoided for years. I wrote to Ethan, not a long email, not a confession. Just a short, honest message. I want to say thanks for being such an important part of my youth. I sent it before fear hit. Phone on the table. I showered, hot water pouring, slowing my heart. When I returned, the screen lit up. Me too, Ethan replied. You've always been one of my most important friends. I read it a few times.
No miracle. No surprise revelation.
But I smiled, because I realized I no longer waited for Ethan's permission to move on. Spring came, bringing long afternoons and pale sunshine. I walked more, breathed deeper. I started noticing other guys, not with familiar panic, but gentle curiosity. Glances exchanged, silent smiles. Nothing rushed, nothing wrong. One afternoon, I stood on the pedestrian bridge over the small river on campus. Water flowed quietly below. I thought of the 15-year-old boy who'd stood before a mirror and whispered a sentence even he feared. I wished I could go back, put a hand on his shoulder and say, "You'll be okay." Not today, but you will. My school years ended not with graduation or applause. They ended in a very personal moment, when I stopped blaming myself for being afraid and started treating myself with the kindness I'd once given Ethan. I don't know what the future holds. I just know from here on, I won't turn my back on my emotions. I won't call desire a mistake. I'll give myself the right to wait for a love from truth. If there's one thing I carry from school years, it's this. Peace isn't the absence of questions. It's daring to live with them without running away. The end of my junior high years.